Hello, and thank you for listening to this lecture number 13 on the early 19th century. This is in two parts, and it's all about the Romantic period. So let's begin. We will start, as always, with some historical and social context. The Industrial Revolution is in full swing. This section is called the Industrial Revolution, and so far we've hinted at it and had just the edges of it. Now it is here. Cities, for the first time, our city workforces are larger than rural workforces. So people are leaving and going into industry and leaving agriculture behind. So we start to see more factories, large factories replacing small businesses. And we start to see modern nations shaped in this century. For instance, we have Greece and Italy down here. There's Italy. Where's Greece? Oh, there it is. It's right here. They have become independent. Germany is a unified nation. Before, it was mainly the Holy Roman Empire. You couldn't really call it Germany, but now you can. And they're all moving forward with some form of representative republic or democracy or a parliamentary monarchy, except for Russia. And we're just not going to worry about Russia right now. They're having a lot of problems. They're still in the Middle Ages. So, do svidaniya. So a little bit after the fall of Napoleon, France restored the Bourbon dynasty, or Bourbon, if you will, which lasted until the mid-century. Then we said enough of those kings, and they formed a second empire under Napoleon III. He did a lot to restore the fortunes and the prestige of France, but he was pretty autocratic. He was ousted in 1870, and the Third Republic was formed. England, the Prince Regent becomes King George I. He died, succeeded by his brother William IV. He died in 1837 without issue, so his niece, Victoria, took the throne. Ruled until 1901, the longest rule in English history when I first wrote this lecture. That is no longer the case. Queen Elizabeth II is now the longest ruler in English history. I'll fix this someday. America becomes a major force on the political scene. This vast land of resources, natural resources, influx of immigrants. Believe it or not, at this time, immigrants are welcomed. We also have aiding American expansion, the Monroe Doctrine, which closed colonization to European powers. Basically said, on the North and South American continent, Europeans are no longer welcome. Thank you. They're welcome to immigrate, but not to colonize. We start to see an idea of equal rights. Yes. Obviously, not in practice yet, but we start to see kind of the beginnings of the women's suffrage movement. We start to see resistance to slavery, abolition. So we start to see the germ of an idea of equality for all. This is also a time when the middle class becomes preeminent over the aristocracy in terms of styles and taste. So there is still aristocracy, but they don't have very much money. And if you don't have very much money, you don't have very much influence. So the buying power goes to the bourgeoisie, to the middle class. Merchants start catering more to the middle class. This translates into a political and economic force. So this is the rise of the merchant, the rise of the middle class. Socially, we divide the century into two periods, Romantic and Victorian. This lecture here, the early part, we will focus solely on the Romantic period, which lasted about 1820 to 850. Now, in broad terms, the Romantic era, Romantic style was reaction against neoclassicism. The idea of reasonable thought was overtaken by strong emotions, intense passion, very, very cultivated. It was spurred thanks mostly to Sir Walter Scott, who wrote these thrilling, romantic, middle-aged novels like Ivanhoe, which captured the public imagination, which translates into the Romantic period. Other writers, Mary Shelley, you wouldn't believe it, Frankenstein is a Romantic era novel. When you think about the passion of the Doctor to create this modern Prometheus. Alexander Dumas père, and of course Shelley, Keats, and Byron, the big three of the Romantic era. Physically and fashionably, yes, romantic men, cultivated this sort of unkempt appearance, that they are too involved in their aesthetic world to worry about fashion. Oh no, here's Lord Byron. Look, that cravat blowing in the wind. Where's his jacket? What is that unkempt hair? This is all a cultivated look, much like a goth maybe, or the anime girls, where it looks, well, that's probably not a good example. Anyway, it is a cultivated look, but it looks sort of loosey. So devil may care. Now in England, Victorian era, characterized by Queen Victoria. In this century, starting in this century and lasting until World War II, Britain is the biggest superpower in the West and the East too. You could say the sun never sets on the British Empire. Used to be true. I think to some extent it may still be. Anyway, large power, very proud of it. Very proud of their mercantilism, their stick-to-itiveness, their worth ethic, and that showed in their clothes. They followed the Queen's tastes, which were formal and understated. So there's that, and then there is sort of this tailored look that they were very impressed with, or very what's the word I'm looking for? Taken with, I guess so. I'm babbling. Sorry. This age can be subdivided into two fashion categories: crinoline and bustle. Now, I mentioned those, but we're not going to talk about those here. That's in the late 19th century. So we're going to focus on the Romantics, but first we have a number of fashion innovations which should be mentioned. We do know that at this time the undisputed capital of fashion is Paris, and as here we have two major innovations in the history of costume: the department store and the couturier. Department stores, we take them for granted, but remember, it wasn't until the early 19th century that this was even an idea. It was basically, it began as a co-op, I guess, is to use a modern term, a collection of traders who would pretty much gather in a common area, like a fair, but they did it all the time. You know, or you know of medieval fairs, Scarborough Fair, so forth, where merchants come at a set time to set up their wares. Well, as we get more into industrialization, these merchants and traders are not going anywhere. They're not going from fair town to fair town. They're setting up in one area in a city, because that's where the buying power is, to sell their good. Eventually, some savvy real estate developers saw this as a way to tap into the growing middle-class market. Say, what if we make it a store of departments? And also, textile factories could produce large numbers of ready-to-wear garments and fabrics and so forth. So there you go. Boom, you have the recipe for the department store. The first one opened in 1841, the Palais Bonne Nouvelle, and it was a hit. Here you see in the Rue Saint-Denis a picture of one, 4 stories high with novelties, Pygmalion, I'm not sure what that's about. Anyway, Prix Marc du Chiffre, I'm not sure what that means. I don't know what Prix means. Anyway, I digress once more. Very popular, this idea of the department store. 1841 opened. By 1850, there were 400 department stores in Paris alone. That shows you how popular these were. A couturier is really a dress designer, a fashion designer, mostly of women's dresses. And the first true couturier with this guy right here, yes, the man with the walrus mustache, is the father of fashion design. He is Charles Worth, and he's not even French. He's an Englishman. He's a talented Englishman, or was a talented English, who worked in Paris, fabric and dress stores. Opened his own little shop, and he said, you know what, if I use my wife to model distinct garments for women, upper and middle class women, I think I could make something. So he would design dresses. A lot of these were just kind of adapting copies, but he says, I'm going to design them. And it, like department stores, was a huge hit. He founded the first fashion house, the House of Worth, and used live models to display his creations. You might have seen them in old movies where upper and middle class clients would come in and sit and have refreshments while models would come through and and model the latest fashions. So this is where we get the idea of haute couture, distinctively tailored dresses. It was a big hit. House of Worth, incidentally, lasted until 1956. So it started in 1845 or 6, so it lasted over 100 years, which is pretty good. It was a perfumier as well. Well, they did perfume, which is still being produced. But the house itself lasted into the 1950s. Probably the biggie. Those are big, big innovations, but maybe the biggest is the invention of the sewing machine. Oh my gosh, this changes everything. It will speed up stitching tenfold, 20-fold, 100-fold maybe, so you can crank out garments the speed of light, metaphorically speaking. Actually, the first sewing machine was invented in 1830 by a French tailor, Barthélemy Thimonier. We don't have a lot of copies of it because what happened is it was invented in rural France by a tailor who was very proud of this idea. You can see, well, I'm getting ahead of myself with Elias Howe. It was pretty much a prototype, and it was destroyed by other tailors who were afraid that it was going to take their jobs. So they destroyed it, tossed it in the river, and cursed out Thimonier. They were right. Actually, it will take their jobs, but it'll be later. The first workable sewing machine was perfected by Elias Howe in 1845. What I'm going to show you here, this interesting is a hand crank right there. So you crank by hand and you sew a garment. So you're not holding the garment with both hands as it goes through. You're going through with one hand. Unless you have a helper, then they can crank and you push through. Pretty good, expensive, kind of a novelty. And then about the same time, a little bit later, Isaac Singer said, you know what? I think I can make these mass market, inexpensive, and I will build an entire industry out of selling, servicing, and marketing sewing machines. And this is what we have. This takes off. He also added the foot pedal, which you can see here. Now you can use both hands free. You crank it with your foot. There you go, big time, and there it goes. It was a game changer. Also a game changer is a dry goods salesman named Levi Strauss. I don't know why I said it like that, but Levi Strauss. There we are. Americanize it. He went to California in the 1850s. He says, I think I can sell canvas for tints to gold prospectors, 49ers. And when he got there, they said, we got tints. We don't have pants. They didn't have decent pants. They were, cotton, linen, the kind of mostly cotton pants, but they weren't durable. The butts would wear out of them, and we'd have these guys walking around with a bunch of assless pants, which is kind of a nightmare when you envision it. So he took the canvas and he turned them into trousers, and he sold out. And he says, this is it. This is my niche. However, canvas pants aren't very comfortable. So he found a rugged cotton, a rugged cotton weave. We talked about denim, and he dyed them indigo. And in 1873, he added the riveted pocket. And then we have the blue jeans. So this reinforced with the rivets. It doesn't wear out. He called them jean because he liked it. It's a type of fabric from Genoa, Italy. That is a cotton blend, but it is not what blue jeans are made of. They are denim material. They are not jean material. They just became blue jean by some clever marketing. At the time, they were called waist overalls. And there's where we get Levi waist overalls. Thank you very much. One more big development is aniline dyes, synthetic dyes. It was discovered in 1856 by William Henry Perkin trying to synthesize quinine. Instead, he created a bright purple dye that worked exceptionally well as a dye for a wide range of fabrics. He named it Movine and opened a dye works in England and became very successful. Other colors soon followed, and we see an explosion of color combinations. When we get to the late 19th century, you will see all sorts of color thanks to aniline dye. So this is a sample of the original. You see it's still color fast. It holds color very well. As a side note, scene painters use it as well. I've used it before. You can't use it very much. It causes cancer. But if you have to do a stained glass treatment on muslin, nothing better. Also, we talked about fashion publications. They reach their I want to say their apex, but they're still probably their apex is right now. But they were becoming increasingly influential, increasingly popular. There were quite a number of them. In Paris, we start out with the Journal des Demoiselles. I got it. You have in England the Young Englishwoman, And by this, you introduce a number of styles. In America, the most influential fashion periodical of the age is the Godey's Ladies Book. This was extremely popular. It was started in 1837 by Louis Godey, published in Philadelphia and edited by the celebrated poet Sarah Hale. Now, you may be thinking, celebrated poet Sarah Hale? What is she celebrated for? Well, for one poem that she wrote, Mary Had a Little Lamb. Godey's Ladies Book was known as the Queen of the Monthlies. Sorry, that's what it's known. It has nothing, I did not make that up. It contained numerous advice on how to run a household, cooking, cleaning, entertainment, sort of a 50s version of Better Homes and Garden or Good Housekeeping. It had sheet music. It had fiction by writers such as Edgar Allan Poe, Washington Irving, Nathaniel Hawthorne, so they paid well. It wasn't a cheap magazine, but most popular by all and a good source of information for us are the color fashion plates with patterns and sewing instructions. Here you see here's a color pattern plate up at top, and then a black and white at bottom right that has a description of this seasonable dress. By the looks of it, I would say it was somewhere around summer and the 4th of July. By the way, you can, if you do Google Godey's Ladies Book, you can find back copies. Lots of back copies. Lastly, 2 new fabrics. Fail, a soft, slightly ridged fabric, usually made of silk and cotton, and chenille, a fuzzy ridged fabric. You start with a solid core of yarn that has short lengths of fabric wrapped around it. So it makes this raised texture. You all should be familiar with chenille if you're over the age of 40. Chenille robes, chenille curtains, all sorts of chenille. This ends part 1. You can see fashion innovation took quite a bit of time to cover. So when we start part 2, we will look at the actual clothing worn by men and women of this era.